Don't pay attention. A man's voice rang in the protagonist's ears as he gently touched her shoulder. His Highness, as the man was called judging by the text and his attire, looked at her with his blue, piercing eyes and assured the protagonist that she could trust and look only to him. Obviously, the heroine was very nervous, which was revealed by her velvety, ruby eyes, which looked anxiously at the man next to her, and her hair, which adorned her pale skin, was the same color. Another hoarse and age-tired voice announced that the evaluation procedure was complete. According to the results of the evaluation, the now well-known protagonist, Riel Blinite, is awarded the level of a high-class savior. The voice also confirmed the title of the protagonist as a descendant of the Antu family. From the audience, around the main characters, other voices were immediately heard shouting and demanding that this valuable girl be sold to them for a lot of money, as if she were a porcelain doll. The voices quarreled with each other while some offered fabulous money, in a currency called shillings, and others marveled and shouted that it was God's grace that had taken pity on them, when suddenly someone shouted louder than anyone else, drawing attention to himself, and everyone fell silent, listening to the man who emphasized, "Did they all forget about the agreement of the Continental Confederation?" The man took out a letter and showed it to everyone present. One could assume that the document was important because it bore the signatures of probably very important people. Obviously, what was written in that letter allowed everyone present to possess the main character, so this smug man insisted that His Highness give the girl to him. The man tried to assure His Highness that they would take care of and bless Lady Ree, but before he could finish, his voice broke, and having previously so actively asserted his rights, the man collapsed to the floor, punished by the sharp and swift blade of His Highness's sword. At the same second, panic and fear took over the room, dominating everyone present. The man who finished the monologue of that smug smartass only smiled ominously, saying that he was having a good time, terrifying the onlookers of the scene even more. The hero continues his ominous speech, telling people that has the once-defeated criminal group introduced itself as the Federation and can now treat the Emperor's wife as if she were an inanimate object that can be easily bought. His glowing sword cuts through the air menacingly, playing a deadly symphony with the tip of the blade, making onlookers shudder with abject fear. The Emperor's eyes look at the audience with calmness, even satisfaction, as if it costs him nothing to take the life of another human being. With a mocking smile on his lips, he asks if they might have another joke to throw out. Suddenly, that hoarse, tired voice interrupts the eerie monologue, asking His Highness to calm down. Judging by his attire, this man was a priest, and there was fear and then anger in his eyes. The man says very confidently that they are in the main temple and that the saints are God's messengers. To which His Highness does not react at all, only "so what" comes out of his mouth calmly and without difficulty. The Emperor covers his eyes, enlightening the priest in his full power, for is there anything on this earth that does not belong to him? But still, His Highness apologizes for his unacceptable behavior in the church, adding that he only thought it was the enemy's lair. Like a predator, inspiring fear by his mere presence, he walks past the priest, saying that he hates it when someone wants his treasure. And then the Emperor addresses the people, forcing them to listen to his official statement, wanting everyone to know that his name is Herrn Linhart von Wilsbach, and that he is the owner of the woman previously known as Riella Blinite. His Eminence emphasizes that this statement is a warning to those who are too greedy, some of whom are afraid of it, while others are annoyed, including the priest himself. "So whoever dares to fall victim to his greed," the man said while everyone listened with bated breath. His Highness waves his sword again clearly and loudly, announcing that those who take the risk should be prepared to go to war with him. Afterwards, the cruel and ruthless Emperor, in a gentle and caring voice, says the protagonist's name, drawing her attention to himself. He walks over to Rie, gently touching her cheek with his hand, asking Riel not to worry and to hold on to him, not letting the mud touch her feet. Without any questions or resistance, Blinite walks closer and falls into the Emperor's warm embrace, doing as he asked. The touch caused the protagonist to feel slightly dizzy, which reminded her of the first time she hugged Hercon. It was a bright, cloudless day. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, enveloping the tree branches around with its rays. There was a small camp on the lawn, and in one of the tents the protagonist's voice was heard, asking Uncle Carl for his opinion. Ree tried very hard to get an answer out of the man, who seemed to be completely unconcerned about what clothes the girl was wearing. For him, it was all just a few pieces of fabric. But Blinite did not give up, forcing her uncle to answer, but he only shouted irritably that he did not know better. The protagonist, of course, knew this, so Uncle Carl had no choice but to leave the tent, which is entered by another man instead. A new visitor comes in, apparently thinking that Carl will get angry and do something. But Riel is not angry at all, on the contrary. She smiles sweetly. She turns to Uncle Hank, and it seems to her that Carl looks rather nervous. Hank is interested in what the main character does and what she does to please the client who is about to arrive. Rie admires herself in the mirror and says that maybe someone, but definitely not her, is trying to please the client. Her cheeks flush with a light blush as she thinks of the person she is dressing for, Fabian. The forest landscape that has become so familiar, the smell of the earth and the small sparks that come out of the small fire that was set up next to the tents. After Hank picked up the protagonist as a child, she didn't really like such places because she was a runaway girl, but there was something that made her really bored. Riel thought that today would be the last time. "Riel, I will make you happy, I promise," the voice of the man she sincerely loved echoed in her head. "When I save enough money and get out of here, you will be my wife." The words stuck in the girl's head, and she could not think of anything else that day. The day of Fabian's promise. Suddenly, someone's voice announced the approach of the client's carriage, and Hank ordered everyone to get ready and take their seats, and to do so without any nonsense. And Rie was sincerely excited about the moment she had been waiting for. Hank ordered everyone to be attentive and maintain their composure in any situation, when the others stood at attention, loudly and accurately shouting, "Yes, sir." Blinide was surprised by this responsibility, thinking that this client must be incredibly important and must have paid a lot of money. The protagonist has a thought. Has her lover really reached such heights? When a luxurious carriage arrived at the camp, everyone was called to attention. When a man with light brown hair and bright shining green eyes appeared from the carriage, Ree immediately called out to him, but suddenly noticed another person. A girl got down from the carriage, incredibly beautiful, with dark long hair and equally dark deep eyes, so gentle and neat. The protagonist was looking at the girl with surprise and admiration, from whom it was difficult to look away. The princess sincerely thanked Hank for his efforts with a polite smile, but he refuted her words, saying that she had gone through some suffering to get here. Deep, obsidian eyes noticed Riel, wanting to get to know her better. Thinking that the client was a princess from a fairy tale, Riel did not forget to bow and greet her politely. Instead, the princess gave her name, Greta. She boasted that Fabian had told her so much about the main character, and the princess was looking forward to meeting her. Greta emphasized that if Riel and Fabian are close, then Fabian's friends are her friends, and there is no need for formalities, which the main character was seriously alarmed by. But the conversation didn't last long. Greta left the main character, saying that they would meet in the evening, leaving Rie with thoughts of such closeness between the princess and her lover. Later in the evening, Riel is back in her room, amazed that she was able to get to know the princess so closely. She is standing in front of a mirror, trying to understand why she was just taken and compared to a princess. What scared her the most was that Fabian could also compare them. Suddenly, Rie heard something and turned to the sound, and an unexpected guest appeared at the so-called door of the tent. Fabian walked inside, calling the girl's name a little uncertainly. Riel was surprised and immediately fell into her husband's arms, asking what he was doing here, because she thought he was supposed to be with the princess. In response, Fabian says he forgot something. The protagonist clings to her husband's chest like a child and asks if it's too much, to which Fabian, not understanding, asks what exactly. Blinide rebels, continuing to receive orders from the royal family, almost too much, without telling Rhea herself. Fabian laughs nervously, apologizing to the girl. Suddenly the man pulls out and shows an incredibly beautiful and delicate rose as an apology. Rhea is genuinely surprised by such a gift as Vivian's rose, which seems to have been incredibly difficult to find. Fabian kisses the girl gently on the cheek, saying that it was his promise and he had turned upside down all the flower shops in the village. The protagonist is amazed by this attention, smells the delicate and sweet scent of the flower, quietly saying that the man is exaggerating. Still, it's good that he cares so much about the princess, Riel thinks. Fabian interrupts the heroine's thoughts, telling her that he has to go and that they will meet for dinner. They laugh together, rejoicing at the long-awaited meeting because, of course, Fabian is her dearest lover. Everyone is sitting at the tables, drinking alcohol and having a good time discussing. It's a rather dark evening, and the pince nez voice asks what plans the others have for the future. Hank replies that he's still thinking about it because it's not every day that you get such a big reward. Suddenly, a rather drunken man says that, as the saying goes, he who has spent the money knows how to do it, right? Another equally drunken man cheerfully replies that jokes are jokes, but he is sure that Hank will defeat that dirty mercenary. And someone else shouts that it's all for the princess. Instead, the princess suggests using this opportunity to send everyone to the capital, of course, and even if they want to, provide them with places and military guards. Everyone is surprised at her sincerity, and Riel pays attention to the conversation. Instead, the princess seriously replies that people have tried so hard to help and deserve it. And the main character is absorbed in her thoughts about whether her lover is going to announce the wedding. The heroine is brought back to earth from her thoughts, and the princess asks what Blinite thinks, to which she replies that it is very nice of her. The heroine agrees that it would be nice to be in the capital, but she actually has other plans. Greta wonders what kind of plans Riella is making to give up life in the capital. When Ree tries to come up with something in response, the others, including Hank, look at her suspiciously, to which she can't say anything because her co-workers don't know about these plans either. As here, Fabian draws the protagonist's attention to himself, showing with his eyes that it is not worth announcing their relationship now. Blinite notices that look and realizes that everything must be a secret, so she continues to try to come up with another answer. Greta realizes that she is inconveniencing the girl and thinks she should consider another way to make amends. Ree is worried, thinking that this is too much, but Her Highness wants it, because she is grateful to her for many things, but Riel does not know exactly what they are because she has not done anything. Greta apologizes to the others, getting up from the table, and Fabian, who was sitting next to her, also quickly stands up, wanting to see the princess off. Finally, the princess wishes everyone a pleasant appetite, and she and Fabian leave the others. It was already deep night, the bright moon had replaced the sun, and stars appeared in the sky. Some went to their tents, and some drunks, after a merry dinner, fell asleep right on the benches. Only Riel remained conscious and was worried that Fabian and the princess would not return for a long time. She looks in the direction where the two left some time ago, but assures herself that they will return soon. Thoughts creep into the protagonist's head about the close relationship between the princess and Fabian, and why Greta is so grateful to Ria. Combining all the factors, Ria thinks the worst. Deciding to find the two, Blinite decisively gets up from the table to confirm his suspicions. As Ria walks along the path, she notices that the carriage is still there, and it seems strange to her. The girl walks on and comes across some familiar flower petals lying along the path. It turned out to be the same Vivian rose that was lying on the ground, crumpled and abandoned. Ria is very concerned about the reason why this flower is here. Suddenly, she hears a familiar voice somewhere close, saying her lover's name. The girl instantly turned toward the sound, wanting to find its owner. Riel looked at the road leading into the depths of the forest and headed straight for it. She saw two figures pressed together in a warm embrace. These two were none other than Fabian and Princess Greta. Under the moonlight, two figures are enveloped, not caring about anyone or anything but themselves. "Fabian!" came the desperate and broken voice of the protagonist from the outside, when Rie finally realized that her bitter guesses were true. When the man heard the voice, he held his breath, realizing that he had been caught in the middle of the worst. He suddenly turned around, shouting the main character's name and momentarily forgetting about the presence of the other girl. But the princess seems to be happy about this turn of events, because her pale, delicate hands touch the man's shoulders, and her thin fingers wrap around his neck. Greta notices Ria's great embarrassment, but this does not stop her from hugging Fabian harder, as if her actions were screaming, "He's mine." Riel was shocked by what she saw. Her guesses were confirmed, and she was speechless. After that, the princess, pleased with her success, leaves the two alone. Fabian comes closer, and the two of them stand in silence for a moment, not knowing how to begin such a difficult conversation. For example, Fabian finally says the girl's name, which brings her back to the memories of their first meeting. A little boy named Fabian told her with a sincere smile what a beautiful name Riel was, and she thought about how much she liked the boy's name. At the age of 6, a small, sincere, and defenseless love came from a name. Suddenly, the man's words brought the protagonist back to reality. He claimed that Riella was the most precious person in the world to her. But was it true? Fabian justified himself by saying that the princess had fallen in love with him and he had reciprocated, and that they would go to the palace together. Riel clenched her fists, barely able to squeeze out the words, and asked him not to joke like that. The main character asked if her ex-lover and the princess were really going to the palace. He turned his head away guiltily, unable to look Ria in the eye. The girl could no longer hold back her tears. Her only question was, what about her? Why did he forget about her? Riel ran excitedly to Fabian and shook him by the shoulders, repeating his own words. He was the one who made a promise but did not keep his word. Blinete was about to say something else when the others in the group came running to hear the screams, wondering what had happened. Riel calmed down a bit when she saw Uncle Hank approaching the two of them with the others. In a trembling voice, Rie recounts Fabian's words that he is marrying the princess and going with her to the palace, and the girl does not know what to do. Hank just sighs heavily. Coldly and completely disinterested, Hank suggests that the girl just let go of her lover because her tears will not change anything. Her own thoughts cut into her heart with sharp claws. Ria recalls that her family said they would establish a good relationship and succeed, and although she cannot support him, she does not understand why tears are rolling down her cheeks. The question of whether Uncle Hank really thinks that it is Riel who is doing the wrong thing now escapes her lips. Hank only sarcastically replies that it's definitely not Fabian, because the princess likes him, and Riel is being arrogant. Hank clarifies that Blinete and Fabian are not married, and definitely do not have a child together or a livelihood. In his opinion, this is the relationship between a man and a woman. They get together, they break up, everything happens. Suddenly, the main character realizes that everyone else knew about it, but no one told her. Everything falls into place in the girl's head, and now she understands why everyone else suddenly stopped joking about Fabian. And as soon as Ria came, everyone quickly changed the topic of conversation. And most importantly, the reward given by the princess was payment for Fabian's making her happy. And it was then that Riel realized what the reimbursement was for, which the princess had talked about during dinner. When Rie tries to leave, Fabian grabs her hand and begs her to stay and listen to him, because he doesn't know how he will be without her. The tears in her eyes don't stop, blurring her vision, unable to speak. Rie thinks it was Fabian who left her, but why does he look like he was abandoned? Without a word, the protagonist breaks free from the man's arms and is about to leave, away from here, just to avoid seeing anyone. The atmosphere is tense, and Uncle Hank shouts after the girl that she has nowhere to go, nowhere to run away from this, and orders her to come back immediately. Fabian hears nothing but his own thoughts, guilt, and sadness, which consumes him from the inside. The very next moment, blue water appears, sparkling under the moonlight, mesmerizing with its calmness. Someone's commanding voice echoes in my head. "Don't drink alcohol, don't go on missions," an unknown person says. It's fun to watch the king behave so strangely. The mysterious man sits quietly in the dark with a flask in his hand. He is clearly drunk, but now he does not care. Piercing blue eyes watch an attractive girl standing alone with her own thoughts on the edge of a betten ledge, while the wind from the sea blows her beautiful dress and ruby-colored hair. He adds that it's also fun to watch this girl he met there. Hot tears flowed down her cheeks as she exposed her face to the cold air to calm her soul. Suddenly, the peace and quiet is interrupted by the girl's unexpected step into the abyss of water as she makes up her mind to make this decision. The dizziness and intoxication abruptly passes and the man jumps up from his seat. While the girl was still being swallowed up by the water, the question arose in the man's mind that Rie had jumped of her own free will. Other people around him panicked, shouting that the man had fallen into the water. Riel sank underwater, her lungs filled with fluid and her consciousness fogged. There is panic all around, people don't know what to do. and the mysterious man who had been watching the protagonist before realizes that she was crying before she stepped into the water. The hero thinks that this is none of his business and it does not concern him, but, in fact, no one wants death so much that they commit suicide in tears. This is something he knows too well to do nothing. So in a moment, the man plunges headlong into the water and his hand reaches out to the unconscious girl. He thinks that it is enough for him alone to see how others submit to this miserable life. His hands grab the softening body of Riel, who no longer saw her savior. So the man decides that this girl must survive. A moment later, the man on the move with the unconscious girl looked out of the water, breathing in the precious air. When the hero pulled Riel out of the water and onto dry land, excited people surrounded them as the man announced that she was still breathing, but needed to be warmed. A menacing voice from under a knight's helmet says that the girl is accused of planning to assassinate His Highness, the Emperor of the Elschweig Empire, urging the ladies not to resist, lest they be taken away as accomplices. Panicked people whispered to each other, not daring to say anything. The irritated rescuer demands answers, not understanding why no one is answering, and is finally told that people are seeing this girl for the first time and that no one was with her. Suddenly, an unknown man waves his arms and steps out of the crowd, drawing people's attention to himself and running forward. He introduces himself as the older brother of the victim, to which her rescuer reacts with suspicion. The unidentified man reaches out with a smile to take Ri into his arms, as if sincerely saying that he and his family were worried about her and thanked them for finding her. At the moment of handing the girl over to the unknown, the rescuer unwittingly touches the hand of the girl's so-called terrible brother. The man seems to hear his innermost thoughts and desires, and he knows that this stranger wants to use the unconscious girl to his advantage. And then the rescuer's suspicions are confirmed, so he decides to act. Under the pretext that the man has changed his mind, he demands that the stranger return the girl, as the latter clutches her tightly in his hands, refusing because he has already thanked him and the advocate can go on his way. When she refuses, the man bluntly replies that he knows the truth, that he does not know this girl at all, and insists on getting her back. This makes a stranger tense and even scared. The stranger does not back down either, claiming that he said Ri was his younger sister. Without letting him finish, the rescuer interrupts the suspicious man with a question. What is the girl's name? The stranger nervously but still stubbornly lies that he knows the name, and the first name that came to his mind is Marie, which he tells the other man. However, his interlocutor does not fall for such an obvious lie, but he does not know the real name himself, and therefore lies very plausibly in response, naming other names that the girl allegedly gave before falling into the water. Having exposed the impostor's lies, the latter shouts that he is being mocked, but behind their backs they heard voices. People began to suspect something was wrong, whispering among themselves. Some wondered if this man was a kidnapper, while others said that the reward for catching such people has been quite good lately. The rescuer, in a threatening tone, clarifies that the victim was not the unconscious girl in the man's arms, but he himself. He suggests that he should hand over the impostor to these people for torture. The kidnapper is seriously scared, but also angry. He retreats, realizing that he has lost the argument. The unconscious, tired, and tender body of the girl returns to the caring hands of her rescuer. And he looks at her relaxed face and realizes that if a friend of his, named Asian, were to find out about this, he would go crazy. So the girl's rescuer wonders what really happened. The next story begins with a man sitting peacefully on a chair reading a newspaper. It seems he was a receptionist at the hotel where he worked. The man flinches from the unexpected loud footsteps approaching him and a small bag of gold that loudly fell on the table in front of him. The man screams out in surprise, and in return, the person who owned the bag orders him to prepare clean clothes and not to let anyone else into the newly rented room. The person who received this order suddenly jumped up and wanted to find out why some unknown person was throwing orders around, but suddenly stopped when he saw how much money was in that bag. He became more active and asked what kind of clothes he should prepare, but was interrupted again, saying that the clothes were as usual and should be left under the door. When the two new arrivals had already disappeared from sight, the man at the table shouted back that he would do it. The man with the girl on his back entered a dark room illuminated only by moonlight. As the man approached the bed, taking the girl, who was still unknown to him, off his shoulders, he thought about why she had behaved so impulsively. Having laid the still unconscious girl on the bed, the man was also worried that Ashen would not leave him alone if she found out that he was in a hotel with a stranger. Looking at the tired and attractive face of the protagonist, her rescuer cannot help but notice that, indeed, all the most successful men in the world would fight to possess such a girl. As he is about to leave the bed, the man, lost in his thoughts, cannot understand why this lovely girl jumped into the water. But realizing that this is none of his business and he should not interfere in it, the man does not notice how a hand is reaching out to him. Suddenly, a quiet and tired voice pleads with the counselor to stay, the only word Riel can manage to get out. The man hears the silent request repeated and turns his attention to the girl, asking her if she has finally come to her senses. He forbids her to get up, because she is still weak and barely conscious. But the girl's small and tender hand reaches out to the man's, grabbing it with trembling fingers, trying to keep it close. Riel begs the man to stay close to her and not leave her, when suddenly a strange sensation makes its way into his head, spreading throughout his body. The protagonist's quiet voice continues to say how scared she is of being alone. The girl's hand tightens around the man's wrist, though still trembling, and she holds him tightly, not letting him move away, while the man is in a slight panic from not understanding what is happening to his head. A strange, unknown aura fills the entire space of the room, replacing the air and the hero's body. A cold sweat runs through the man's entire being as his thoughts become confused, filled with the voice of a barely conscious girl and strange hallucinations. The pupils constrict, and the heartbeat becomes louder than all other sounds, echoing wildly in the hero's ears. When his gaze again turns to the girl's reddened, exhausted face, where hot tears have begun to flow again, and she repeats her plea not to leave her. The hero's own body fails him, barely keeping him on his feet, when Riel's voice suddenly calls a name unknown to the man. This name was the name of the traitor, Fabian. The protagonist could barely keep her eyes open and repeatedly begged and pleaded with Fabian to stay. Fabian, Fabian, Fabian. This name filled not only the girl's head, but also the man's head, who began to experience hallucinations from this strange, painful sensation. Numerous faces flashed through the hero's mind. This year, you don't have to worry about supplies. The voices broke off, overlapping and interrupting each other. It seems to be starting to rain, other voices said, and silhouettes echoed in the man's mind. Visions overwhelmed him, and he did not understand the reason. His pupils become even smaller. They are barely visible against the iris. His head feels like it is not itself, heavy and confused. It hurts, as if it is going to explode. But the man realizes that he has never had such vivid visions. When the hero comes to grips with himself, he shakes the girl by the shoulders, demanding to know who she is and whether she is a witch. Her exhausted eyes open again, trying to focus on the person who spoke to her, who, on the contrary, asked her to answer. While holding the girl's shoulders, her advocate notices that her body is too cold. Putting Riel's body back down on the bed, the man regains consciousness, trying to realize what has just happened. The protagonist faints again, exhausted by her own thoughts and tears, and falls into a restless sleep. The man sinks down into a chair next to the bed, gripping the seat with his fingers, worried and confused about who this stranger really is. His unknown seizure finally passes when he thinks about why and since when he became so soft. His pupils are back to normal size, and the pain in his head is gone, as are the visions. He realizes that he didn't feel threatened by this girl, but now he is even more interested in who the girl really is. The warm rays of the sun enter the room through the windows, enveloping the room and warming the space with their warmth. As she slowly regains consciousness, Blinete smells a warm aroma in her mind. Her hand notices someone else's hand touching her fingers with the tips of theirs. She wonders who this unknown person is. Images replay in her mind, and the name Fabian, the one she would like to forget, comes up again. Ree notices that she feels so hard and comfortable at the same time. Suddenly, her consciousness finally wakes up fully when she realizes that she fell into the water last night. So why is she so warm? Rie bounces up from the bed she was sleeping on before, her hair disheveled and her eyes tired and red from crying. She tries to figure out where she is. when suddenly her eyes are drawn to the person whose hand she has just touched. On the edge of the bed, a man of fair appearance slept peacefully and calmly, his hair shining in the sunlight, golden in color, his eyelashes long and equally light, and his skin so pale and charming. And Rie instinctively squeezed her husband's hand in hers. She lets go of his hand, mesmerized by the attractiveness of this stranger. Without noticing it, she reaches for her savior's head, unable to resist touching his magical hair. Suddenly, Rie realizes what she is doing and quickly pulls her hand away, realizing that she shouldn't be doing this. The protagonist sits on the bed, watching her husband sleep and wondering what happened. Submitting to the feelings of sadness and betrayal that enveloped her thoughts and body, preventing her from thinking soberly, she behaved foolishly. Thinking back on all the events, it was this guy who saved her from this terrible choice. She dared to make this choice to jump into the abyss of water, but she pulled this man down with her. After that, Rie steps quietly and lightly to the floor from the bed, her body still weak and barely able to stand. Almost collapsing in mid-stride, the girl heads for the door of the room. She realizes what a horror this is, and her face tenses as she realizes all these events. The protagonist opens the door quietly as possible, because it creaks miserably when she interacts with it. Riel wants to leave as soon as possible before her rescuer wakes up. Finally, she turns around and looks at the still sleeping man on the edge of the bed, and in fact, the heroine does not know whether she should thank or apologize to her savior. She turns away again, taking a step toward the doorframe, wondering if she can even blame this stranger for bringing her back to a life she was definitely disappointed in. Riel honestly admits to herself that the only thing she wants to do right now is to run away, far away. And closing the door behind her, she leaves this guy alone. Somewhere in the forest of the southern expanse of the kingdom of Lyotta, there is a house with a bar called Fernie's, where the main character seems to have worked. Someone's cheerful voice called Riel and asked her to give him the money for the drinks that Sir Bill had already paid for, according to someone's thoughts. But it seems to be Bill himself who denies this and asks to finally bring the bill, to which Riel refuses with a sincere smile, saying that everything will happen again if they come here tomorrow. Suddenly, a woman jokingly pushes her in the back, saying that she should accept the money because it's all Sir Bill's fault. But Riel replies that it's all thanks to Mrs. Fernie. Laughing sincerely, Riella recalls that the difficult fall and winter passed and spring came. The wounds that seemed to never heal and would remind me of their existence all the time began to hurt less. So, to be honest, it was neither too bad nor too good for the heroine. The main thing is that she managed to escape to this village. Suddenly, I heard footsteps and a door creak. Instead of the usual bar patrons, tall and bulky knights in shining armor appeared on the doorstep. The room fell silent as all heads turned to a few people whose faces were hidden behind sturdy helmets. Someone's voice tried to sound friendly and unconcerned, welcoming the knights in such a remote place, but it was hard to talk to such strangers. Without answering any questions, the eyes of one of the knights are directed at Blynyth, terrifyingly saying that they have finally found her. The unexpected message throws Riel into a genuine shock. She has just been detained under international law, and her face shows fear, embarrassment, and surprise. Riel dares to ask what it all means, but the three in armor come closer and ignore the girl's question, clarifying that until Blynyth is handed over to the Empire, she will be in the charge of the Royal Knight of the Lyotta Kingdom. A lady who had just been laughing with her, hiding the girl behind her and rebelling, stands up for Rie, asking if these honorable knights even know why they are arresting Riema, as the woman called the heroine. In absolute shock, Riel doesn't understand what kind of planning they are talking about, because she has never even thought about it. For a moment, the girl plunged into her thoughts, in which the image of Fabian appeared, calling her with a smile on his face. And behind him, the silhouettes of Uncle Hank and Carl. Rie's mind recalled all these people who had once been kind to her. "Where did she go? She has nowhere to go." Hank's irritated voice echoed in the girl's foggy head. She didn't know what to do. A distant voice was shouting somewhere out there, asking if Riel would be back soon. While she was thinking and preparing for the fact that she would have to go back to that terrible day. As three soldiers led the girl past the bar patrons to the exit, she thought about her own, that even if she had been arrested, she could have been protected. And besides, there would be no such trouble. Surprised and worried looks followed the girl as panic grew in the room and people whispered among themselves. When she was led out of the building, Riel hoped that her nightmare was finally over, but it just kept going and didn't seem to stop. A damp, cold room with almost no windows and uncomfortable, frightening bars, in which a tender and defenseless girl found herself. The voice that threw Rie behind bars when she fell on a bed of hay with her hands tied confirmed that it was incredibly cold, but that it was nothing to worry about. She would endure it, and then it would get easier. The protagonist got up from the floor to explore the new place where she would spend who knows how long, and she wondered if she could get used to it. Poor Riel hoped that Fabian, who would be better off forgotten, had already gone in search of her. In her mind's eye, she saw a shining and desirable image of a man shouting that he would soon save her, and that she shouldn't worry. Riel imagined that she and Fabian met again, and that the girl, backlit, was screaming and wishing that he would save her. However, soon enough, when she had already lost consciousness in the cold and darkness of the prison, many people, hoping to receive a reward, perjured themselves against Rie. If we hadn't hoped for a miracle, which was something elusive, nothing would have happened, and in the end, we would have had nothing but regret. There were songs and lots of voices at the celebration, and there were decorations and confetti flying everywhere. Someone's voice announced the arrival of His Highness, the Emperor of the Elschweig Empire. 3 horsemen came into view, 2 of whom were guards, and 1 in the middle, seemingly the most important person on a white horse and in a lavish outfit. His Highness has already been met by the king himself, and as we have already mentioned, Princess Greta. They both seemed to be worried about something, but the princess assured her father, the king, that they shouldn't worry, they had nothing to lose. To which the king assures himself that everything is fine. The princess is a little nervous herself, but she is confident that everything will go according to plan on this important day. The voice that had previously announced the arrival of an important person added that people should welcome the new son of the continent, the young Emperor Elschweig. Listening to all this and watching the emperor approach, the princess assured herself that everything would be just like that, without any unforeseen situations. As soon as the emperor got off his horse, the king hurried to greet the emperor, but the man interrupted him and immediately thanked him for meeting the king. The king nervously hurried to continue the massacre, saying that it must have been so lonely and difficult for the emperor to get here. His Highness only sarcastically replies that his ears have even begun to hurt. The king is genuinely shocked by this hypocritical response, and then whispers to the orchestra that was providing the music for the event to stop playing. Then there was silence around, and everyone turned their attention to the 3 important people and 1 horse standing inside. The princess quickly tries to break the silence by inviting His Highness to take a walk around the palace, after which a welcoming gala will be held in his honor. But before Greta could finish, she was interrupted again, and the emperor said that he would first like to make sure that the transfer of the kingdom to his control would be successful. The king understands what is going on and asks directly if His Highness wants to resolve the issue with the sinner right now, to which the emperor immediately agrees. His Highness is asked again, emphasizing the words clearly, whether he really wants to resolve this right now. The emperor is annoyed by this postponement, so he shows by his appearance that he definitely wants to resolve this here and now. The king notices that the princess worships without question or resistance and obeys His Highness's orders. The king is nervous and whispers in Greta's ear to ask her if she is sure because the scaffold is quite far away and the emperor will definitely get his sword. Instead, it seems that the princess has a better plan, and ignoring her nervousness, she replies that everything is for the best. The princess clarifies that there are many observers around and that this will make the power of the law look much stronger. But still, while the culprit was being dragged out of the darkness, Greta reminded her father to come to his senses and pull himself together. 2 knights are approaching the 3 people, dragging a girl who is exhausted behind them. They confirm that this will be the emperor's decision, against which no one has the right to oppose. This sinner, who had attempted to kill the noble Vilsbach family, is now in the emperor's power. When the exhausted girl found herself at the feet of His Highness, and he reached for the handle of his sword, His Highness was told that he could do with it as he saw fit. The shining blade of the knife glistened in the sunlight, as the Emperor pulled it from its sheath with a distinctive metallic sound, causing everyone around him to shudder. The princess smiled quietly, ominously, as the thing she seemed to be waiting for finally happened. The Emperor's calm eyes traced the features of the girl in front of him. The sharp blade of his sword came dangerously close to her neck, as if at any second, with one quick movement, he could put her out of her misery. Hot tears of either fear or happiness ran down Riel's cheeks as she looked at the shining sword. A few moments and this nightmare would finally end for her. The icy silence was suddenly interrupted by the Emperor's commanding voice, forcing the girl to raise her head and look at him. When resistance is shown in a terrifying and rough voice, His Highness repeats his orders, rejecting any desire to disobey. The people around them whispered among themselves. They did not know how this miserable girl, in their opinion, dared to disobey His Highness. Others confirmed that she was not captured in vain. We already know about the Emperor who disappeared for no reason and then returned after 10 years of absence, whose name is Hermann Linhart von Wilsbach. Many people said and believed that he peacefully ascended the throne of the Elschweik Empire, but few knew how much was lost for the sake of this so-called peace. The sinner, who knelt before the Emperor like the prey of a predator, was soon to see the ruby color in front of her. His Highness was silent for a moment, deciding what to do next. In a quieter and calmer, even gentle voice, His Highness repeated the order for the girl to raise her head and look at him. Her exhausted face, her eyes red with tears, but just as charming, looked at the man in front of her, who only said something, noticing how thin she was when he looked at her exhausted body. In His Highness's opinion, even though it was a prison, it was heartless to starve it to such an extent, which made the king and princess shudder. The people around panicked when suddenly the man who had driven his opponent in the fight for the throne to distant lands showed mercy to the sinner. Around them, people were wondering whether the sinner's impudence had offended His Highness, while others did not understand what was happening at all. To stop the new gossip, the princess orders the person who was supposed to read the report on the girl's crimes to deal with it as soon as possible before it gets worse. He nervously came closer, announcing his presence, telling His Highness that he would begin to read the report. While the man was reading out the words, a girl named Riel Blinite was accused of being the head of the plot to assassinate His Highness, organized last fall in the eastern region of the empire. However, without allowing the man to finish, the Emperor, who had not listened to this for long, could not stand it, and his sword again sliced through the air. His Highness's sword easily cut through not only the air, but also the worthless papers in the hands of the one who read the words written on them. Not a single word came out of the announcer's mouth, except for pitiful moans and genuine fear that gripped his body as the sword came dangerously close to his neck. Still in an eerie voice, the Emperor says that he wanted a sinner. He casts a cold glance at the man, who is trembling incessantly. The Emperor corrects himself by replacing sinner with her name. With a trembling voice, the man, scared to death, promises that he will make changes to the report. The princess is nervously biting her fingernails, and I don't understand what the Emperor is doing, because the sinner must be punished, and that's all. The princess suspects something is wrong. She does not seem to like the course of events at all, when suddenly Riel moves as if something has happened. Greta thinks that the Emperor might notice something he shouldn't know, when his gaze returns to the girl on the ground, who cannot bear the torment. Her exhausted body falls lifelessly to the ground, her mind foggy as her thoughts disappear into a painful dream. When people around us are rebelling again, why did the sinner fall? Is there any point in raising her at all, because people like her are not even worthy of seeing the light? Greta bites her lips nervously as she watches the events unfold, thinking that if His Highness really wants to keep the girl alive, then if he has realized that, things are bad. However, the princess tries to reassure herself by thinking that the Emperor simply has no choice. However, the feeling of anxiety is not always false. His Highness takes a step forward, watching Riel's powerless body. This is not a joke and alarms Princess Greta, who is watching His Highness's actions. What happened was something that no one in the audience expected. Absolutely everyone expected the sinner to be punished. But instead, the Emperor approached Riel with all the tenderness he had, picking her up in his arms. The sky-colored eyes traced the features of the girl, so exhausted and defenseless. Even when unconscious, she is not free from torment and suffering, and even in her sleep, tears flow from her red eyes. Lifting Rie in his arms, the emperor notices that the health of the prisoner, who was to be brought to his empire, has clearly deteriorated. Already another man announces that in this regard, they express their deep remorse in the face of His Highness for not respecting international law and causing a breakdown in the investigation. The man, nervous, tears the documents in half himself, shouting at His Highness that he pretended to be angry, but he only deceived them, and that this is very unprofessional for His Highness. Of course they understand everything, the man continues, but you have to know the limit and not behave foolishly. This man, who turned out to be Ashen, demanded to know why the emperor had not warned him in advance, and this after he had decided to use the so-called carrot rather than stick strategy. Asian is rebellious, because before he became a captain of the royal guard, he was a close friend of His Highness, ready to do anything for the emperor. His Highness, in a rougher voice, repeats his friend's name, telling him to stop shouting, but he does not stop, thinking that His Highness definitely wants his friend's hair to fall out from stress. Unable to stand the screaming, the emperor threatens to leave Assion hairless himself, forcing him to shut up. 315. The emperor adds that it is not for him to deal with this situation, but for the royal family. In response, Assion mutters that if His Highness wanted to hurt their feelings, he did a good job because everyone there is going crazy over these events. The emperor, on the contrary, is interested in what happened to the girl who fainted at the party. Asian didn't immediately realize who he was talking about, but he remembered immediately. The man reports that the girl was transferred to the hospital, in which she receives proper treatment, but still remains unconscious. Asian continues, while the emperor listens attentively. From what he has heard, Riella starved for about 10 days after being imprisoned. Suddenly, a friend of His Highness notices that his attention is drawn not only to his report, but also to the pile of documents on his desk. He wonders if the emperor has read all the papers, but even if he has, there are too many. The royal police's reports on Riel Blinite, the only suspect, were, to put it mildly, just perfect. All the details of the investigation fit together and converged, and there was plenty of evidence. However, something still did not add up in this investigation: the facts of surveillance of Herhan, the crown prince. These reports, in the chapter with Riel and her gang of robbers, were extremely far from the truth. No physical evidence was found at the time, and His Highness, who was scurrying around the country and seriously ill, could not resist. After successfully returning to his home country, he postponed the investigation of the attempted murder until later. But after everything had calmed down, he tried to negotiate with the Liata kingdom and turn it into a mutually beneficial cooperation. However, he could not have imagined that they would put the blame on the girl. Ajin dared to ask why not play along, since it was true that Rie belonged to a mercenary group. The emperor was silent for a moment, and then only replied that his friend should not say anything if he did not know the truth, and the latter was quite surprised. Assion is annoyed that the emperor is saying this to a man who has been checking all this for so long. The man is rebelling because he is the head of the investigation team, and who else but him should say this? Asian is surprised and asks what is wrong with His Highness, to which he replies that Ashen is right and no one but him can say that. Asian agrees, because now maybe his friend will finally see what a valuable subordinate he is, but the emperor interrupts again, saying that there is a new task. He orders his friend to go to the ward where Riel is now, which surprises Asin. Asian tries to avoid the task, saying that he hasn't even unpacked his luggage or even had lunch yet. But the emperor offers him a place to sleep and eat at the hospital. With tears in his eyes, Asian begs His Highness to have mercy. But before he can finish, the emperor sends him to fulfill his task. The glass shatters into small pieces as a woman's hysterical scream tears through the space, asking what does it all mean. A knight who was assigned to the princess as a bodyguard reports that one of the emperor's envoys is now lying in a hospital bed. The princess clenches her fists, asking in surprise. The knight continues that he doesn't seem to be trying to punish her, and Greta shouts at him, "What the hell is he talking about?" The princess threatens that if this knight speaks like this, everyone around him will think that it was she who set up the assassination attempt. The knight wants to refute something, but the princess interrupts him and throws him out of the room. Greta sighs heavily and touches her head, trying to understand why the Emperor's assistant is protecting that girl. She bites her nails nervously, worried that His Highness might find out that she ordered the knights to kill the girl. However, she assures herself that this cannot be true, because she has made arrangements with the witnesses and the reports must be perfect, so she does not understand what is wrong. A gentle, caring voice echoes in Her Highness's memories, asking her to be careful. Someone's hand gently touches the princess's small hand. In Greta's memories, the silhouette of a man appears who does not want her to hurt her beautiful hands. Fabian's name echoes in the girl's head and his charming face. Suddenly, strange thoughts come to the princess's mind that Fabian could be, but she quickly dismisses these terrible thoughts. The situation is getting worse, and Greta is nervous, not knowing what to do. She decides that she must act before Riel wakes up, no matter what it takes. The next story begins with Ajin being disappointed by the prisoner's complete silence and no longer hoping that she will say anything at all in the near future. And then a person intervenes who is on the side of the accused and understands why she is silent, but if they spend more time and try to convince her. Ajin interrupts, saying that it won't work, referring to the man in front of him, whose name is Colonel. He reports that it has been 3 days since the girl regained consciousness, and he believes that she will respond soon as there are so many topics to discuss. The girl's condition did not improve much, and even when she was called by name, she did not respond. The Emperor concludes that it turns out that there are no threats or promises and she does not listen to them. He finds it rather strange. They agree with him, because usually silence only brings the day of execution closer. His Highness is sincerely surprised that after the girl has seen him without saying a word, Ajin agrees without hesitation, but then asks what exactly the Emperor means. He doesn't answer directly, so Ajin imitates the girl's imaginary reaction, saying words of admiration in a joking and high-pitched voice, to which the Emperor sincerely agrees, and his friend rebels even more. At Asen's obvious rebellion, the Emperor passes by him and completely ignores his words. Ajin suspects for a moment that something is going on between His Highness and this girl, but quickly puts these thoughts out of his mind. His subordinate notices that His Highness seems to be going somewhere, and this makes Ajin wary. Ajin dares to ask why the Emperor is heading to the hospital room while His Highness has already put on his cloak and quickly replies that he wants to speak to Rie in person. He smiles slyly, casts a quick glance at his assistant, and says that he can do nothing but visit her in person. He leaves Sir Colonel and Asion, ordering them not to follow him unless they want to show that the Emperor has left the palace. The man approaches the girl's hospital room, walking through the hospital corridors and hiding his face under his cloak. Suddenly, next to him, he hears 3 nurses whispering among themselves. They were talking about Riel, saying that maybe nothing would happen if you didn't look at her, because sometimes it's even scary to look at her. And one of the nurses agreed, saying that the girl was rumored to be crazy. Passing by the 3 girls, His Highness listens to their conversation, and he hears that Rie keeps looking at the wall without saying anything, and one of the nurses heard that the girl went crazy and became mute when she heard the news that she was going to be hanged. So, if the patient is awake, we can discuss the plan for her execution. The Emperor casts a cold and judgmental glance at the girls, concluding that this place definitely does not belong to the royal family, but rather to a snake club that values gossip. The girls agree with each other that they want this strange girl to be removed from the place as soon as possible, because she is annoying as hell. The girl was sitting in a hospital bed covered with light monochromatic linen, holding a cup of tea that she hadn't even touched. Suddenly, someone's voice pierces the air and says that they have heard that the girl has become mute. The man draws her attention to himself and continues that he understands the torment Rie went through, but he cannot continue to remain silent in front of the whole world. Riel's foggy and tired eyes turn to the man in front of her, but her lips do not say a word. Without the man's voice, the room is silent again, and the girl can only look at him without any desire to exist in her eyes. The concerned Emperor sincerely asks the girl to speak, wanting to end the unbearable silence. He moves closer and gently touches Riel's chin, running his thumb along her lower lips. He easily lifts her head up, forcing her to look him directly in the eye, leaving her no option to escape eye contact. But even so, her eyes are still foggy, without a sparkle of life or any sign of interest. The Emperor runs his finger over the girl's chapped and pale lips. Then he takes his hand away from her face and touches his lips with his finger. Something irritates His Highness very much, and he thinks about some dirty deed. The next moment, the Emperor is sitting on the couch again, looking rather unhappy, and his assistant Asian thinks that it would be worth telling him that it is time to plan joint affairs with the royalty. But it is quite risky to do so in such a difficult and tense atmosphere. It seems that His Highness was thinking about something very intently and paid no attention to anyone or anything. The man standing next to Asian whispered what had happened at the meeting with the condemned woman, but he did not know the answer himself. But something definitely happened after the Emperor returned. Suddenly, His Highness called the Master of Ceremonies and ordered him to arrange a meeting with the head of the kingdom tonight in their exact presence. The man sighs with relief and rejoices, saying that surely the king will be so happy to hear this because they have already made all the preparations, so the Emperor only has to come on time. But the Emperor says that he will organize everything. He added that the food should be prepared from products brought from the empire. The Emperor justifies this by saying that they owe the royal family a favor, so this will be a thank you. The Master of Ceremonies bows and promises to clarify everything, and then leaves the room. After that, His Highness turns to Asen, and the latter turns to him. Herkon reminds them of how they took prisoners in Honest 7 years ago, and Asion agrees. His assistant clarifies whether he is talking about those who took Clady's deadly poison in order not to reveal secrets, but he asks why he is asking about it. And His Highness confirms this by mentioning the condition Riella is in, suggesting that the symptoms are too similar. A hoarse voice asks how to thank the Emperor for this honor, since he personally arranged the reception. The man says that he will be the first king to be honored by the Emperor with a reception. Herkon justifies this by saying that he is staying in this place for a while, so he decided to organize a small celebration and is glad that the king liked it. The king is delighted, but he seems to be the only one who sincerely pretends to enjoy it, unlike the princess. She is surprised and angry that they were humiliated on the very first day. All banquets and receptions were canceled, and now the Emperor himself is treating them to dinner, and she does not understand how her father pretends to like it. His Highness asks if the Emperor is satisfied with his chambers, to which the man replies that the castle is magical, and that he is always taken care of so well that his vacation is very comfortable. The king is pleased with this answer, and the princess wonders why Herkon pretends not to be interested, although he is arranging an investigation right in the hospital room. Greta notices that the two have been chatting serenely for almost an hour. Greta observes the Emperor's relaxed behavior and suggests that perhaps the man has surrendered. Perhaps Riella has been silent for so long that Herkon has no choice but to give up. Greta thinks this is the most logical of all options when the Emperor's frosty gaze consumes the princess. Greta shudders from the Emperor's deadly blue eyes, which seem to look into her soul. Because of this, the princess choked on the wine she was drinking from a glass, trying to cough and steady her breathing, and the Emperor, rather mockingly, notices that the princess seems rather tense. The Emperor asks one of his aides, Bill, to bring a cup of shay, but the princess refuses with a trembling voice. On the contrary, Herkon insists that the princess drink tea because it calms her down. Greta thinks this looks rather suspicious, but thanks for the tea. She is nervous, but still takes a sip of tea from a small cup. Suddenly, Greta is overcome by some miraculous effect and is incredibly surprised by it. The king notices Greta's change of face and remarks that this is some incredible tea. The Emperor offers the king a cup of tea, and the king cannot refuse to taste the Emperor's tea. His Highness says that this tea is harvested on the plantations of the southern islands, so technically it is not his tea. Herkon's voice changes in tone, suggesting that the king and princess must have heard of a poisonous plant called clady. The princess almost chokes on her tea again, but restrains herself, realizing what she is talking about. The king shouts at his daughter, asking what she is doing, and the princess starts to speak instead. It seems that not only the fact of the poisonous plant frightened the princess. If the dose is controlled, the plant extract has a calming and relaxing effect. The Emperor, who had previously taken the fruit of this plant in his hand, squeezes it between his fingers and the poisonous liquid runs down his arm. He goes on to say that the poison only takes effect when there is too much of it, which makes Greta even more tense. After that, a predatory, eerie silence hangs between the three of them for a moment, in which only the beating of their own hearts could be heard. In a nervous and not so cheerful voice, the king says that this is a very interesting explanation and looks at his daughter and asks what to do if the poison content really exceeds the norm. The emperor calmly explains that tea does not harm, but only heals, while poison, on the contrary, paralyzes the tongue and throat, making a person unable to speak and think clearly. The king again pretends to be a jolly gentleman and remarks that the emperor is quite intelligent, to which he replies that he only knows about poisonous plants. Greta just clenches her fists angrily. The emperor's voice becomes cold again, confirming that the convict has recently awakened. Greta clenches her fists tightly and tries not to show her anger. She knows everything and let no one try to deceive her again. The king agrees because he understands the guilt that lies on his shoulders for his mistakes, so if there is any way they can make amends to His Highness. The emperor rises from the table and clarifies that the conversation will not last long. His Highness wants to complete this as soon as possible. Then if the enemies of the two states are here, there is no point in additional conditions. The king happily asks if the emperor really wants to execute that girl right there. Instead, Herhan goes because he wants to take full responsibility for Riel Blinite's life. From now on, she will be under the protection of his empire, so he asks not to pay too much attention to her. The king objects, trying to shout something, but the emperor interrupts him by asking the princess if she has anything against it. Greta grits her teeth in response, thinking about what this girl is doing. Not only is the kingdom humiliated by a girl, the princess recalls how Fabian begged her to answer whether Riel would be okay. Greta is tired of listening to his constant pleas, so she makes a promise and asks Fabian not to worry. The princess swears that she will not kill the girl who is so precious to Fabian, but she cannot help but deny that she is annoyed. Greta looks up and admits that it is sad, of course, that the game was lost when the emperor revealed it. However, the day of her revenge would come sooner or later, and she promised to do so in her thoughts. But in response to the emperor, she said that she had no objections. In the next moment, we learn the truth that the poison in Riel Blinite's body got into her body in prison, so she was at great risk. The maids outside the room whispered to each other, realizing that a girl accused of violent crimes was in the room. Meanwhile, in the middle of the room, it is announced that the medicine has barely managed to remove the poison from Ri's body. One of the maids worries why this sinner is still in the castle where the emperor lives. Asian notes that it was his fault because no one else could get into the palace, but nevertheless, the poison somehow got to the girl anyway. The emperor adds that the poison does not enter the human body noticeably. Perhaps the offender could not have imagined that they would notice. Yes, he used Clady's poison instead of some other to cover up everything, added His Highness. The girl's still unconscious body was lying in a much softer bed. The emperor watched the girl's more or less calm expression when his assistant added that with prolonged use of the clay, a person could die, and all the sins of the criminal would go to the grave with the victim. Herkan recalls that their meeting in Laderi last fall was accidental, but even so, if the man had been a few seconds late, the girl would have died. Recalling all of this, the emperor notes that everyone around him has changed over the course of the year, but only Riella has remained the same. Her husband mentally notes that she is constantly getting into difficult situations. Strangely enough for such a cruel emperor, this girl, Riel, is constantly pitied. Herkan notices a restless tear running down Ri's cheek again, and he adds that she is constantly experiencing difficulties. His Highness suddenly hears his own heartbeat and wants to touch the girl's face. This girl, still unknown to him, who evokes such strange feelings in him, the emperor freezes as his heartbeat quickens, and his mind becomes foggy. His hand, which was already reaching for Ri's pretty face, quickly stops, and the emperor orders Sir Carnell to take care of the girl. However, His Highness asks that no matter how long her treatment takes, she should not be treated with strong medications that could worsen Blinite's health. Ashen seems to be the only one who noticed the strange change in the emperor's behavior, and when the emperor leaves the room, his aide follows him. Left alone with His Highness for a moment, Asian hesitantly dares to address Herkan. The man asks directly if something happened between Riella Blinite and the emperor that he doesn't know about. In his opinion, there must be a reason why they are so actively defending the former prisoner. Asian remarks that the royal family has acted like fools, so now they have a reason to bring things to justice, but when none other than His Highness speaks. Asian sarcastically imitates the Emperor, repeating something like, "Do whatever it takes to save this girl." But Herkon denies that he said anything like that. But the point is still similar. The Emperor realizes that Asian is no fool, and he never thought that he would have to keep secrets from his closest aide. The Emperor quickly changes the subject, which Asian does not accept, but the man continues, saying that he has begun to have migraines and even hallucinations. The naive assistant naturally falls for this outright lie and is genuinely concerned about the Emperor's health, offering him medicine. When His Highness has successfully avoided answering the question he had asked earlier, he leaves the excited Asin alone. He also stands up abruptly, but Asian never receives an answer to any of his questions. Someone's gentle and tender voice calls Riel to follow him, holding her hand. Little Riel, not understanding why she has to go somewhere, asks where the boy is taking her. A worried girl with glassy eyes asks her friend not to leave, not to abandon her. Suddenly, the image of Fabian pops up in my head again, saying that Ri is the most precious thing in the world to him, and the girl begs him not to leave. An image of a princess appears in her blurred thoughts, clutching Fabian in her arms, smiling slyly and looking him straight in the eye, while Ri begs her husband not to speak like that, not to leave her alone. And here she is again, standing on the edge of an abyss, and the cold water is about to envelop her body, brazenly making its way into her lungs, not allowing her to breathe. Visions appear before her eyes again and again, as if someone's hand is grabbing her body, as if it were Fabian squeezing Ri in his arms. And then it's dark again. A mean and unbearable princess humiliates and mocks an innocent girl. Again and again, her eyes fill with tears, hot and burning the skin of her cheeks. And then the darkness disappears again, and Riel sees a bright, shining silhouette standing in front of her, and she begs him to save her. The Emperor's face is frozen in her memory, and the protagonist begs him to stay, not to leave. With all the strength she had, Rie tried to keep Herkon close, constantly repeating the same thing. Don't leave her alone, save her, because she had done nothing wrong. Rie wakes up in a cold sweat, her eyes red with tears again and her heartbeat rapid after a nightmare. The doctor who was in the room noticed that the girl had regained consciousness and recommended that she rest, as her body had not yet recovered from the effects of the poison. Without answering the doctor, Riel tries to say something, her voice hoarse and tired after a long silence. The protagonist jumps out of bed, uttering incomprehensible letters and reaching out to the man standing next to her. Other voices in the room were talking, some wondering what the girl was going to say, while others suggested tying Ri to the bed, because they thought she would be violent when she came to. Suddenly, the girl almost falls out of bed, but notices some pieces of paper on the table next to the bed. Frightened, with tears in her eyes, Rie reaches for the table and quickly, almost illegibly, writes something on the paper. Another man stops the girl and snatches the letter from her still weakened hand. The Emperor enters the room and asks what's going on, and everyone immediately turns their attention to him. One of the men addresses His Highness, and Riel shudders in fear, remembering everything that has happened up to this point. The man who took the letter from the girl shows it to the Emperor, commenting that the sinner has written something on it. The Emperor notices a request for salvation on the letter, which surprises him a bit. As Riel gets up from the floor, Herhan asks why she is asking him for help. His Majesty steps up to the girl, saying that he knows she was framed, but that doesn't mean she's completely innocent. It does not matter whether she did something illegal or not, she is an accomplice, and this fact is unchangeable. In a rather threatening voice, the Emperor asks why he should help the girl. Riel is trembling with fear, but she realizes that she has no choice. If she doesn't get a hold of this person who was supposed to punish Rie, she may not get another chance. Herkon's unchanging voice brings Riel back from her thoughts, telling her that he will reformulate the question. In a less rude tone, he begins, "What if he helps the girl again this time? Will she run away again?" Hearing His Highness's voice, Rie notices the angry look that bore into her. Their hands on the table almost touch, and suddenly Riel realized and could not believe who the man in front of her was. His earlier cruel gaze, which seemed to condemn the girl for recognizing him too late, changed to a more gentle one. Smiling lightly, the Emperor remarked that it seemed that Riella had finally recognized him. He seems to have saved her a couple of times already. So how is Riella going to repay him now? Finally, he promised that he would wait until Blinite said so herself. The Emperor turned to his subordinates, Bill and Carnell, ordering them to do everything possible to get the girl back on her feet in a day. Leaving the room, Herkon threatened that as an emperor, he would not tolerate shortcomings in the care of Rilla Blinite. And in a fairly short time, the castle was already the site of gossip that no one could believe. Many people whispered that the emperor had fallen in love because he constantly ignored important events and lived in another palace. As if the palace had gone mad, all the subordinate kingdoms and empires are trying to please the sinner. As Bree said from the western castle, the imperial retinue came the other day, and the emperor needed women's clothing made of the finest silk. Everyone was shocked that this stranger needed such clothes. The princess's assistant, who was helping to hold the umbrella over her head, shielding her from the sun, suggested that she return. Greta very irritatedly refuses and wonders how she, Riella Blinite, dared to be in the Holy Royal Palace, even after a personal meeting with death. The Emperor's assistant reports that gossip is spreading at a terrible rate. People are talking about the greatest love of the century. Azion jokingly says that perhaps it is the spell of a femme fatale who has captured the Emperor's attention. They say that this is much more popular lately, at which the Emperor laughs quietly. His assistant gets seriously annoyed at this mocking response. Asian rebels again. He doesn't like that His Highness finds it so funny, but Herkon replies that political dramas are his taste, and that true love is just kindergarten. The aide asks the Emperor not to joke like that, but the latter simply cannot take the situation seriously. His friend, on the other hand, wants to treat it like adults. Asian desperately shakes the Emperor by the shoulders, demanding an answer. He suspects that something happened between Rie and Herhan, which is why he is so protective of her. The disappointed assistant realizes that he will not get answers from him, so he decides to find out everything from Rielle herself. Asian had hoped to go to Rai and ask her, but she beat him to the punch with her own set of questions. She was incredibly interested in whether it was true that the Emperor had ascended the throne last winter, and how exactly it had happened. Asian, realizing the mess he is in, still tries to insist on his question. He makes the excuse that he can't explain it all, but Riella has even more questions, as if she were a child. Not even allowing the man to answer the question, Rielle finds even more questions, but he quickly grabs her by the shoulders, forcing her to pay attention to him. Asian does not understand how the girl started this conversation with him in the first place, so that he does not have time to say anything. However, a moment later, the man apologizes for his outburst, explaining that everything is so complicated that he does not understand anything. In his thoughts, he notices that on one side is a stone wall, and on the other side is only softness. After that, Asian forces the girl to go to rest, without receiving an answer to her own question. It was already dark outside, and in the room as well, because the windows were boarded up and only small cracks let the moonlight in. The doctor was checking on the girl's health, saying that she was much better and should start walking at least in the corridors, even if she was still under care. When the doctor was about to leave, leaving the girl to rest, she asked him to stay for a minute. However, the doctor either did not hear her or simply ignored her, leaving her alone again. Ree was surprised that she was not imprisoned again, but was given a room in the royal palace, food, clothing, and medical treatment. However, she realizes how everyone will look at her. The protagonist notes that not only is she frightened by this situation, but others also do not understand what is happening. Ree would like to know why the actions of His Highness, whom she unwittingly calls just a guy, are so strange. Getting out of bed, the girl only wanted to ask the doctor, who had already left where His Majesty was now. Rielle leaves the room for a dark but no less luxurious corridor, lit only by the moonlight that comes through the huge windows. The girl's light footsteps echo in the large corridors as she heads somewhere her intuition leads her. Soon, Rielle finds what she was looking for, or rather who she was looking for, the Emperor. She notices His Majesty sitting at the table on a luxurious chair, with his assistant standing by his side. Hearing the footsteps, Herkon turns his gaze to the late visitor, studying him with his icy eyes. Instead, Herhan turns his attention back to the documents on his desk. As Rielle starts to get nervous and excited about what she's going to do, isn't that a bit much? She has so many questions but doesn't know how to ask. Suddenly, a voice offering to sit down brings the girl back to earth from her thoughts. She stands in the dark, realizing what she has heard and trying to understand if it is exactly what she heard. After hesitating for a moment, Riel nervously rubs the back of her head, thinking about her decision. But still daring to join in, Riella approaches the table, about to sit on one of the chairs. For example, just as she was about to sit down, the Emperor asks, or rather clarifies, whether her voice has recovered. The icy, menacing eyes of His Majesty's conspiracy direct their gaze at the girl, ordering her to sit closer. Riel hesitates and her hands tremble, but few people dare to go against the Emperor's word. So Blinite did sit down closer to His Majesty as he had asked. Silence filled the room again, and Riella wondered what she should do now. The Emperor's voice cut through the air again, as if he, too, was wondering something about the girl. Riel turned her attention to him while the Emperor asked if the girl had anything to tell him. Realized that she might have to start a conversation. Not knowing where to begin, the girl asks incessantly what exactly His Majesty wants to know. Herkon doesn't seem to be expecting this question, and he looks at Rie with a little misunderstanding in his eyes. The girl looks down at the floor, afraid to make eye contact with the man, and replies that if there is something he wants, she will try to find it. She added that she knew that the Emperor was waiting for an answer, but the girl did not know how to repay him for saving her. Herkon himself had long since forgotten about these words, but the girl seems to have clung to them. Riel apologizes and continues, because His Majesty already owns the whole world, and she doesn't know if there is anything else he wants. Suddenly, Blinide asks if she can offer proof, but the Emperor asks what kind of proof. Riel clarifies that she is referring to evidence that it was the royal family that was preparing an assassination attempt on His Majesty and adds, "Isn't that why she was kept in the castle?" The Emperor admits that the girl is right. He kept her here purely for political reasons, but why was he so irritated by these words? In an angry voice, the Emperor says that the girl seems to be accustomed to treating herself like an object, but there is enough evidence to prove him right. Ri replies a little hesitantly that she only wanted to help, but before she can finish her sentence, she is interrupted by a question. Did the Emperor need her help at all? The protagonist realizes that she is not worthy of being even a political tool of this man. She lowered her head and fell silent, her world collapsing again, not even allowing it to rebuild. Now Ri knows that no matter how hard she clings to this man, her nightmare will not end. In a quiet and disappointed voice, Ri apologizes to His Highness and lowers his head even lower. The Emperor also fell silent, looking at the girl's depressed appearance. He realizes that he should not have said what he said. The heroine repents that she could not have guessed that he was a member of the royal family, she just wanted to say. The Emperor's own voice interrupts the girl in her head, asking her to stop. His eyes closely follow every change in the girl's facial features. She continues to say that she is guilty before the Emperor, and he only wants Rie to stop. Unable to stand it, the Emperor jumps up and gets up from the table. Without any warning, he quickly leaves, leaving Rie with his thoughts. Herkon's mind races with questions about how Rie suffered so much humiliation and abuse, so what did she go through? Hot tears flow down Riela's cheeks again, and she simply cannot hold them back. In a trembling voice, Blinite apologizes again, clutching the fabric of her dress. When the Emperor is interested in only one question, what broke this unfortunate girl so badly? The Emperor's aide enters his chambers, saying that he has escorted Riel to her room. Asian approaches His Majesty, who is sitting on his bed, and says only one word to him, "Hand." However, his friend refuses, to which Herkon replies that he is asking for a good deal. At this very moment, Asion's mind is full of thoughts. He is sincerely worried about His Majesty, and he understands this and notices, saying that he can hear him thinking. Asion notes that it is good when internal and external features are combined. Asian says that he shouldn't say that, and then asks why His Majesty hasn't read what Riel has in her heart. At this, Herkon sighs heavily and says that he does not know what is in this girl's heart. With his straightforward answer that this is why His Majesty is so rude, Ashen strikes the Emperor in the heart. The subordinate concludes that there are probably people on whom the Emperor's powers do not work, and the Emperor agrees. The Emperor knows that he was born with a special gift, but it is impossible to be able to read the soul of every person. No, Herkon knows that this is not the case, but that the girl's soul seems to be incredibly dark and confused. Bright rays make their way into Riel's room, enveloping her in their warmth. When a girl can't stop thinking about what happened in the evening, but on the other hand, what did she expect? Fabian and the boys who valued her left her alone, so how is this guy different from them? You think I'm going to ask for your help? The words cut into Riel's heart like sharp claws, but she assures herself that there is nothing to be surprised about. Of course, the Emperor of Elschweig, with his heart of ice, would he ask for help from a mere sinner? But the thought of why this man hadn't lost her yet never left her mind. Riel was walking down an almost completely dark corridor, holding a flashlight and a candle. Blinite thought that no matter how cruel the Emperor was, he showed mercy to such a girl, so she owed him. Noticing two knights crossing their spears in front of her, forbidding her to go any further, Ri stopped. One of the knights ordered us not to move and said that this was His Majesty's territory. Ri said a little confusedly that she urgently needed to speak to His Majesty, clutching the flashlight tightly in her hands. Suddenly, someone's hand came out from behind the spears, ordering them to be removed. Ri notices a familiar face and doesn't seem to be as nervous when she's alone with these terrifying knights. It was Asian who told the two men to disperse, breaking the tense situation. The subordinate invites Ri to come in, saying that His Majesty is in his office. Both guards were very surprised by this gesture. One of them asked why the general did this, and Asian told him not to interfere where it was not necessary. Riel thanked her rescuer and walked through the door, heading down the corridor. Riel noticed that the door to the Emperor's office was slightly ajar from a safe distance away, and she politely informed him that she needed to speak with His Majesty. Blinite stood for a few seconds, but there was only silence in response. She did not know what to do, and stood silently at the door, waiting for an answer. Riel thought that the Emperor would order her to go back, but no, there was no answer. Suddenly, she noticed something strange in the doorway, and she paid attention to it, peering into the darkness. Riela ventured into the middle, calling out to His Majesty once again. But again, instead of an answer, she heard only silence, and when she went inside, she saw something she hadn't expected. The Emperor was sitting on the floor, his eyes closed and his body exhausted. It was unclear whether he was conscious or unconscious, but his body was on fire, and his breathing was intermittent and rapid. Riel, forgetting everything in the world, rushed to the Emperor for help. Blinite was screaming with all her might, asking someone to come to her aid. But she realized that the room was too far from the nearest guards and no one would hear her scream. Riel noticed that she had a strange, sore throat, but she did not forget that she had to go out and call for help. Behind her back, the Emperor made a sound showing that he was at least alive. Ri heard her husband's voice and then turned to Herhan and asked if he could hear her. The Emperor only made another incomprehensible sound, and the girl told him not to worry because she would call someone to help. The Emperor did not seem to hear her at all. His face looked completely exhausted and defenseless at that moment. For a moment, the protagonist allows herself to be lost in thought, wondering if this man knows how painful it is to feel lonely, if he knows even a drop of this pain, if he has experienced something similar. Riel comes to the conclusion that she can never leave this man. The girl gently and caringly takes the Emperor's hand, stroking it with her fingers and saying that she is here and can he hear her. Riel promised that she would do everything. No, she would call everyone she could. She reminded him that the Emperor was safe. His Majesty finally forced himself to open his eyes when he heard the girl's voice beside him, calling her name in a tired and exhausted voice. Riela saw a little activity and asked if His Majesty could hear her. The Emperor did not answer her question, but only tightened his grip on her hand. With his other hand, Herkon gently touched the girl's cheek, this time calling her by her full name, Riel Blinite. Ri approached and pressed her forehead to the Emperor's, telling him that she was there. As if from afar, footsteps are heard, and not just one. They are gradually approaching, getting louder and louder. 2 knights and a general burst into the room, and one of them asked what the scream was. The guards quickly approached His Majesty. One of them ordered to call Sir Carnell, known as a doctor, and the other grabbed the girl's hand, asking her to move away from His Majesty. However, she could not move away, because the Emperor was squeezing her hand as hard as he could. The guard repeated himself irritably, using a much rougher tone and forcibly pushing Ri's hand away from His Majesty. The Emperor regains consciousness, noticing familiar people around him. Still in a weak voice, he asks Riel to leave while his assistant helps the man up from the floor. One of the knights replied that they would take the girl out of here right away. However, in an imperious tone, the Emperor tells him to take his hands off Riel Blinite. Even though he is weak, the Emperor's icy gaze frightens him to the point of trembling, and he orders the girl to be released. A moment later, the doctor examines the patient and diagnoses that everything points to cramps. Sir Carnell says that has Ascian forgotten that the Emperor's condition must be monitored? The man admits his mistake, realizing that he should have been close to His Majesty. Riel doesn't quite understand what this is all about, and what does Mr. Colonel mean by cramping? Now the Emperor looks rather irritated, as if to say, "That's right, now you know my secret. What are you going to do with it now?" Mr. Carnell goes on to say that rest is, of course, necessary, but you need to take a sedative, to which His Majesty replies that he will manage. Asian, his loyal assistant, notes that this is a direct order from Sir Carnell. Asian suggests that if the loss of consciousness occurred after 6 months, it means that there may be consequences. No wonder his strength was torn from him. All the hallucinations, all the visions, absolutely everything that he saw personally and that his mind painted. This is how it felt to read the thoughts of the people around me. As the Emperor had previously thought, the gift that God had given him was in fact nothing more than a curse. Asian continues to speak, changing the subject to whether Riel Blinite had accidentally touched His Majesty. Riel doesn't quite understand the question, but argues that if we're talking about a surge of energy and consequences, then an accidental touch can bring a lot of problems. She replies directly that she thinks it would not be wise to leave the Emperor alone, without help, and takes his hand, to which Asian asks in surprise. The general's face instantly changes, his features are worried and tense. How does he break down and yell at the girl? What is she doing? Grabbing her shoulder tightly. Asian screams like he's out of his mind, asking if Ri has any idea what she's done. The girl shudders in fear. The Emperor's commanding voice demands that he stop, but Asian refuses, because this is not a case when you can say, enough is enough. The subordinate notes that in order to make an accurate diagnosis, he needs to know everything that happened before and after the attack. The Emperor replies coldly and without emotion that Ashen has captured the wrong man. Adding that his assistant should calm down because the Emperor is not dying, this makes Ascian calm down a bit. He realizes what he's just done and apologizes to Riel, who accepts his apology. With a rather blank and glassy look, Riel replies that she is fine and it's nothing to worry about. However, because of this, she is now gnawed by the thought that her actions could have harmed the Emperor's health. So now they are interested in what these seizures are and whether His Majesty's disease is treatable.